8th grade, welcome to geography class today. Today our goal is to add another geography skill to our tool belt, and that skill is reading a thematic map. So the paper that you have in front of you should look exactly like what you see here on my screen. What I'm going to do with you today in this video is read through and talk through each of the different directions on how we would practice and then apply this skill so that as we move forward throughout the year and we see different thematic maps from the different parts of the world that we're studying, we can totally break those things down and pull information that is key and important from those items. Let's take a look. Learning the skill. A thematic map is a map that conveys information on a particular theme or topic. Almost any kind of information that is linked to a location can be expressed in the form of a thematic map, such as rainfall, languages, vegetation, natural resources, and population density. A thematic map may include some of the information on a political map, such as the major cities, states, and national boundaries. Thematic maps have symbols that are tailored to best convey the information they contain. Colors and patterns are usually important visual elements in a thematic map. A map key tells the meanings of the colors or patterns. For example, a vegetation map may use crisscrosses to represent grasslands and dots to represent evergreen forests. Various symbols are used as well. A chief mineral product map might use circles to show the locations of coal deposits, triangles to show natural gas, and squares to show iron ore. Now, the reason why they use such maps and they use symbols is to best communicate those items, and that's one of the ways in which you can distinguish between different types of materials or different types of information, because a lot of times a thematic map isn't just going to be specific to one thing. It might be more general in terms of the natural resources. Now I gave you a couple examples in terms of vegetation or those resources, but it might want to show all those things all at the same time. So it's a lot of information in a larger scale. They're going to need to represent that with those different types of symbols. Take a look at this example that you might look at later on down the road when we're studying actually different parts of the country to see what those resources look like on a specific thematic map. Here's an example of how we might use thematic maps in the course of our study throughout the year. In Chapter 4, we're studying the eastern half of the United States, east of the Mississippi River. You can see this is a physical map that shows the different types of elevation. As the colors change, they change in elevation, so that color is indicated here. That's a specific thematic map. That's something that's showing the physical geography in a location. A typical political map is going to show where those state boundaries are and the cities. The stars represent those capitals. A population density map shows the density of a population, so where more people live, the darker the color is. The East Coast is obviously heavily populated because this is where people first settled. So these are the oldest cities that have been growing and growing and growing since our country was first settled and founded. The resource map was what I was referencing to say what resources are in a specific location. Now, if you look really carefully, there are multiple layers to this. The land use shows the different colors to say what are those particular parts of land being used for. So green, there's a lot of farming that's happening in the United States to produce all the different types of food, not only for people in our country, but in all other parts of the world as well. Subsistence farming means that it's a lot smaller scale to where people are farming just for their own self, not for something where it's commercial where they're trying to sell it. Livestock raising is not necessarily that popular in the East Coast, so you don't see that color represented here. And in the fish portion, you see a lot of the different fishing that's going to be happening towards the ocean, to where that's going to be commercial, to where you would buy that food or have that cooked at a restaurant. Other types of land usage that you might see: manufacturing and trade. Big one right here in Milwaukee. We're known for that manufacturing. These oil stacks are for the petroleum or the coal that's being produced in those areas, the coal in these carts. You can see the different types of resources and the different types of land uses. So there's multiple layers, and this pretty substantial key shows you all those ways in which the land is being used and the resources that we have at our disposal that turn into what would be the economic system. Why people work where they work and the jobs that are available to them are a lot of times based on those resources. So those things, geography-wise, affect how people live and why they live where they live. Another one of those is just simply the climate facts to show the differences between what you would experience weather-wise throughout the entire year, the climate-wise throughout the entire year, to show the southeast being a lot warmer than what would be our typical Midwest or the northeastern part of our country's type of climate. Those are examples of a thematic map and how we would use those in class throughout the year. Now back to our activity. Let's practice this skill. Directions say study the thematic map of wind currents, then answer the question below. Here's our map of wind currents. You can see that anything that's blowing from this left to right direction, those are labeled westerlies across the United States. Our weather comes in this western pattern, and it goes all the way across what would be kind of this northern hemisphere portion and southern hemisphere portion. As you get closer to the poles, this middle section has this western wind. As you get closer to the equator, it actually reverses and goes the opposite way, and you have these what are called trade winds going from what is right to left in this direction. Now you can see here there's distinguishings between those types of winds and those degrees. Between the cold winds have this dashed line because it's coming from a colder area, so from the Arctic and the Antarctic you can see those dashed lines. A warmer wind is coming from a warmer area. Those are probably going to be what you would find right in the center portion of the equator portion, the tropics portion of our map, and then anything that has this little blip on it is a polar front. So here's where you're going to get into what would be the polar area, the Arctic and Antarctic circles, to where it's really, really cold and it's almost frozen throughout the entire year in those areas. Now, high latitude, mid latitude, low latitudes is referring to the latitude, latitude, the latitude lines on our map. Low latitudes are going to be close to zero. Those are the darkest areas right through the middle near the equator. The mid latitudes a little bit lighter in this northern and southern portion, and then the high latitudes are again those Arctic and Antarctic areas at the poles. Now that's the information on the map. Let's now use that information. Number one says, what is the main purpose of this map? If I look at the title, it says study the thematic map of wind currents. So it's trying to tell me about the wind currents on our Earth. The main purpose is to display Earth's wind currents. I would write that in a complete sentence. The main purpose of this map is to display Earth's wind currents. Nice work. Number two, what do the arrows represent? Well, if I go to the key, the arrows represent the types of wind. Cold wind, warm wind. And they demonstrate the direction. So not only the type of wind, but the direction of the wind. Arrows represent the type of wind and the wind currents, so the direction of the wind currents. Number three, what symbols are used to show the difference between cold currents and warm currents? If you go back to the key or our legend, the dotted line shows our cold wind, and the solid line shows the warm wind. That's answered for number three. Number four, what information does the map legend give you? The map legend explains the symbols on the map that show different types of information. So these different colors indicate different locations. These different symbols indicate different pieces of information. So the map legend gives us information explaining the symbols on the thematic map. Well, let's apply the skill. Use the map of wind currents to answer the following questions. Number one, what current brings air from the Arctic Circle southward? Let's go back to the map. Here's the Arctic Circle. Which ones would be from this Arctic area going south in this direction? Based on the westerlies, they're pointing in this kind of northern direction or western direction. Those can't be it. So from the Arctic Circle coming down, it says right here, polar easterlies. Polar easterlies. Number two, find the trade winds on the map. Use the map to answer the following questions on the trade winds. Now let's find those trade winds. Trade winds, again, are right through this tropical section here. They are a lot of times in this easterly direction, but they're all called trade winds. Either they're coming from what would be the southern hemisphere or the northern hemisphere into that tropics near the equator. Let's look at number two. Where are they located? Be specific in your explanation. I'd say they're surrounding the equator, both north and south of the equator, if I were to describe that accurately. Letter B. What are the trade winds called on the map? Trade winds are called the north and south easterlies. Southeasterlies coming from the southern hemisphere, northeasterlies coming from the northern hemisphere. North and south easterlies for letter B. Letter C asks us, what are the trade winds separated by? How are these described? What are the trade winds separated by? Right here in the middle, you have a trade wind coming here, you got a trade wind coming here, but then you've got this area that's calm. This area that's calm, this area that's calm. So in between each, there's kind of a dead zone where you've got a lot of wind currents that are coming from that transition between colder air and warmer air towards the tropics, but you've got this area that's calm. Those are called doldrums. Doldrums. Number three. What effect do you think the North Atlantic westerlies have on Western Europe? Let's look at Europe, and we see the westerlies pouring right from what would be the center part of the Atlantic Ocean coming into this direction to Europe. What kind of effect would that bring? Now, I've previously mentioned, and I think looked at this before when we looked at wind currents and then ocean currents, that the ocean currents actually bring warm water from the tropics up to this part of Europe, and then those wind currents actually push that warm moist water into this area to create its climate. So even though Europe is actually farther north in terms of the equator from the United States, it actually has a lot more mild temperatures, especially in the wintertime. We get a lot of snow up here in Wisconsin and in the Midwest. They don't get much snow at all. They have sometimes a lot of rain in that winter months, but because this is coming this way, bringing warm water that heats up the air in this direction, and then that warm air being blown from the ocean inland, you're going to have a warmer climate. They have a warmer climate for number 3. That's what that wind effect would have. That should answer all the questions in terms of practicing the skill and applying the skill. My goal again for you is to understand how to read a thematic map, how to use the legend that is in that map to take and say, well, what do the symbols on that map mean? And then to be able to use that information from here, understanding the map, to answer those questions. It might be a map that looks like this, or it might be something that is demonstrating the different types of information that we're looking at, whether we're studying population density, resources, climate, or different types of geological facts. A thematic map is really useful for showing really specific information while also being able to understand something's geography and orientation in the earth, where it's located. Thanks for watching. Finish up on that assignment as you've gone through the video, and you should be set for the day. Thank you.